Welcome to the only wrestling podcast that covers the WWE developmental system from its inception to modern day. From OVW to MCW, the HWA, Deep South, FCW, and much more. Hosted by Brian Asbury and Mortimer Blankenship. Now let's dive into what could have been, what should have been. Welcome to Developmentally Speaking.
Hey, before we get in this episode, can you do us a favor? Will you go ahead and subscribe to the channel?
Will you ring that notification bell?
And if you would, give this video a like. Well, enough of that mumbo jumbo. Let's get to the episode.
Let's talk developmentally speaking, glow up, and connecting through wrestling.
Hey everybody, I'm Morty.
And I'm Brian.
And on today's episode of Developmentally Speaking, we have Deuce Shade himself. How's it going, Deuce?
Boys, what's going on, man? Appreciate you having me on your show.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on. We do appreciate it so much. Now, the first question I typically ask, I ask everybody the same one. What made you get into professional wrestling?
I think I know the answer.
It's actually, I actually stayed away from getting into professional wrestling, to be honest with you. So have you ever been somewhere in your life and you know you should be doing something else?
Mm-hmm.
You ever been there?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, so that was me, and that's actually how I got into the business. I was working a couple jobs, I was married, I had kids, and I actually, all my life, I never wanted to wrestle, ever. Like, it was never a thing. Like, you know, I'd watch my dad and all of that, and uncles and all that stuff, but for me, it wasn't a thing, and so I actually stayed away from it. And then I had some cousins, big wrestling fans on my mom's side, and they were the ones who actually kind of put the bug in my ear. Is they kind of said, hey, and we were all at like a family gathering, you know, somebody's barbecue at somebody's house, and a cousin I'm really close to, his name's Johnny Tapusoa, on my mom's side, and he said to me, man, you guys should, you should get into wrestling. And it was the first time it actually ever really stuck in my ear. Him and, you know, my other cousin that was there, and I had a bunch of them, and that was the first time the thought, I was like, oh, maybe I should, you know? Mm-hmm. And then I was, like I said, I was working these different jobs, and I finally had the bug, if you will. I was like, I should be doing something else than what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. I was working at a TV station. I was a youth counselor, and like it just wasn't where I wanted to be, and I knew I should be doing something else. And so that kind of really started the thing of, okay, I should think about getting into professional wrestling. And then my aunt came to visit Dwayne's mom, mm-hmm. Dwayne Johnson. Right, his mom came to visit. She was watching Dwayne. We were living in Utah at the time, and they were doing a show in Salt Lake, and so she stayed with us, and we stayed up till about 4 a.m. And she was talking to me about getting into the business, and it was after that I was like, okay, I need to seriously think about this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that's a very unique way. You know, I feel like you probably couldn't tell her no.
Yeah. Exactly. Oh, you think it's a good idea? Okay, yeah, probably. I probably should.
So what was the next step for you? Where did you train? What did your dad think?
So when let me kind of back up a little. Mm-hmm. So basically, after that night of talking with my aunt, and it really got me thinking, and basically some of the thoughts was, you know, you might regret it if you never do it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And so she suggested a few things that I do, and so basically one of them was, okay, I need to call Dwayne then, and I need to figure out. So I talked to him that night or the next day at the show, and I said, hey, I'm thinking about getting into the business, and you know, what do you think? And you know, and then we kind of he did the show, we separated, and then I called him back again. I was like, okay, I'm getting into the business. Who do I train with? And I was like, what school do I go to? So I'm fully, you know, ready to pack my bags and go, you know, put money down and go to a wrestling school. And he gave me literally some of the best advice I've ever received. And I'm so grateful for him for it, because had he not suggested this, it would have changed my life. And he basically said to me, you need to go train with your dad. I mean, he's one of the best to ever do it. And who's going to train you better than your father?
Very true.
And so, yeah, and so I basically, I was like, I didn't even think of that, right? That didn't even dawn on me. And so then now to answer your question, so I call up my dad and I said, hey, Dad, I want to get in the business. Will you train me? And it kind of went quiet for a little bit, right? And then he was like, I've been waiting for you to ask me.
Yeah. So when it went quiet, was there this thought that crossed your mind, like, uh-oh, what's he gonna say? I feel like there'd be a moment there where you're just like, oh.
Yeah.
So it had to be
Yeah,
a huge relief.
I wasn't sure what he was gonna say, right? Because
Yeah.
I'd never talked about it. I'd never said I want to do this, Dad. And so when I brought it to him, and he's kind of paused for a second, and then basically said, and I don't remember how long the pause was, right? I just my dad, maybe for dramatic effect, he wanted to see, I don't know, but then he finally said, okay. I've been waiting for you to ask me this. I never wanted to push you. I never wanted to force you to do this, but okay, I need you to quit both your jobs, and I'll get you a ticket, and I'll fly you up here, because I couldn't afford to fly. I was living in Utah. He was living in New Jersey at the time, and he's like, and you're gonna fly up here and stay with me, and you're gonna have to leave the wife and kids and come up here, and we'll start training. And so that really began my process of going and spending time with my dad, which was training wrestling, right? But it was time I was never going to get back, because then my dad passed away, right? What's it been? I don't know, like 2017, I think he passed away. And I would have never gotten that time that I had with him training or on the road had Dwayne not told me, you need to go train with your dad. Like it literally changed the course of my life. It changed the way I saw my father, because I saw him one way before, and now, here's this totally different perspective that I got to see, because I'm now in the family business, right?
Oh yeah. So how was training with your father? Did he take it easy? Did he? How intense did it get?
Yeah.
So I'll say two things on that. I'll say that, so all my life I've heard all these stories of how good of an athlete my father was. Okay? So, I'm from Hawaii, my dad's from the islands, from Fiji, right? And so I would hear all the time, being around family and friends and just people that knew my dad growing up, and I've heard, man, when your dad played rugby, man, he would tear everybody up, and man, when he played softball, and he'd whack the ball out of the stadium, and same thing with baseball. And like I would hear those stories nonstop, and so I knew what a great athlete he was. And so me, now growing up, right, I'm not that great of an athlete. Like, I'm not bad, but I'm not like the all-star, right? And so I always felt behind, no matter what sport I was playing. I always felt like I was playing catch-up. And when I stepped in the wrestling ring for the very first time with my dad, and the first thing we did was lock up, right? That was the first thing he taught me. When we lock up, and in all honesty, it felt like I had been there all my life. If you've ever been somewhere and you're like, oh, this feels like home, or I feel comfortable here, that's, in all honesty, what it felt like locking up for the first time with my dad. And it kind of came, I don't want to say easily, but it came, maybe naturally is a better word, is it just seemed to make sense to me. It made sense. Whereas when I'm playing football or basketball, I just had to work extra hard to even get you know, a little thing. And in this situation, you know, we're locking up and he's teaching me headlocks and takedowns, and it just seemed to flow and come naturally to me. And I felt it picking up quickly. And what I mean by that is, so he took me to train at one of his friends' wrestling schools, Gino Caruso, who I'm so thankful for Gino that, you know, he was good friends with my dad. And Gino, my dad went to him, he said, hey, my son wants to get into the business. Do you mind if we use your extra ring in the back? You know, it was an old boxing ring. Can I train him back there? And, you know, Gino said, yeah, of course. And so I would get to hang out with some of the students that Gino had. So I'd get in the ring with them, and you know, I'd ask, okay, so how long have you been working, or how long you would be? And when I realized that I was near them in different things, different moves or understandings, I realized, okay, it's coming for me. It's coming for me. And so my dad was a very good teacher, very good trainer. Like, he was really patient. He would always tell me, it's right, it's like a dance, and we're dance partners, and we gotta dance. And so, you know, he'd sing that song, you know, we gotta make a little love, do a little dance, get down tonight, right? He would sing that song all the time while we were training. And you know, and just trying to describe to me what that's like to wrestle.
Right.
And so he wanted me to understand the move and flow and to do that dance with him. So that's what it was like training with my father.
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
How long did you? So you trained, and then where did you first start working?
So we started. I actually probably I would say, what was the first thing I did? I think I did a run-in. Was probably the first thing I did. We're on an indie show. My dad's, you know, working the indies and up there in Jersey, that whole East Coast area, and you know, he would have the gimmick table where he's, you know, selling the autographs and stuff, and so we worked out a deal where I did a run-in for it during his match. You know, they're beating him down, and I do a run-in and jump the railing, clock the guy, and body slam the guy for my dad to do the splash and do the finish, right?
Awesome.
So that was my first introduction into actually working. And then, you know, I ended up doing a indie show out there. I think it was in New Jersey somewhere, but I don't remember where the run-in was. It was on the East Coast somewhere. I have it written down somewhere.
Yeah, that's so cool. like your first thing to do is run in and setting up for the Superfly. Like that's awesome. For sure. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you a good story about that. Right? Is so we're going over it, right? And the guy that my dad's working, right? So they start ribbing me. They're like, hey, do you think you can clear this guardrail? There was a guardrail in front of the tables where my dad was doing the autograph. And they're like, are you sure you can clear this guardrail? And so they're giving me a hard time. Like, they're not sure if I'm going to be able to make it in time to do this spot, right? And so they're just giving me a hard time, ribbing my dad too. And they're getting on me. So, right. So I'm at the gimmick table selling the pictures and stuff. And then, you know, here comes my time for the spot. And man, I just like jumped over the table, and the guardrail, like, right, just cleared it by whatever, right? Because I'm like, there's no way I'm missing this spot. And, you know, and I come running in the ring. And then what was bad is I slammed the guy, right, and set him up. But he says, yeah, man, you slammed me. And he's telling me afterwards, right, you slammed me. And I look up, and I like put him right next to the turnbuckle. He's like, Jimmy's going to have to jump straight up and come straight down now. So, I mean, I blew the spot in one way, but not in another way. Right?
You're so nervous about getting there on time that you put him in the wrong area. Yeah, well,
I know. That's these, you know, wrestlers ribbing you, man.
Yeah.
So I should have known better growing up, you know, on the road with my dad all the time, but I was so worried about jumping this guardrail and being there on time. I was like, I didn't know where to put the guy.
Yeah, I've had stuff like that happen to me before. supposed to hop up to get the referee's attention. I hop up, the referee's already down doing the count, and they're like 1, 2, 3. Well, I messed that up. Okay, no problem. I'm so worried about missing the spot because the same concept. They were being like, well, don't be late, and I jumped up there. I wasn't late, but the referee just didn't care. Just counted to 3 anyway. But it's just how it goes. It happens sometimes.
How long
That's
did
like
you?
one of the things my dad would always say, right? You can be early, but you can't be late.
Yeah.
That's very real.
How long did you do the independence before your developmental deal came about?
Woo, baby. So I was on the indies for, well, there was a couple. So the WWE contract didn't come for, it was like 4.5 years before I got a developmental deal.
Mm-hmm.
But the first actual contract I got was about 6 months after I started training, I think, something like that. And it was a little promotion they tried to do out in California. Some of the guys that were related to like Def Jam Records and those guys started what was called the Urban Wrestling Alliance, and so I was part of that crew of those guys that were in there. Some of the guys that were there. What the heck was his name? He was bodyguard for JBL at one point. I forgot his name.
Bodyguard for JBL.
Black guy.
Orlando Jordan.
Bald. Orlando Jordan was there. Yeah.
Okay.
And so there was a few other guys that had wrestled there that had done some stuff with like TNA and all of that. But so that was my first wrestling contract, was with those guys, and then they folded. But WWE came about 4.5 years after I started training in '99 with my dad.
And how did that whole deal come about?
The developmental deal with WWE?
Yeah.
So, after a lot of frustration, so I was very unrealistic, and I didn't understand. Even though I grew up in the wrestling business, I was not smart to a lot of things. I grew up in the locker rooms. I traveled, all over the place with my dad, but he didn't teach me a lot of things about how the business worked and what to expect and all of that. That came after I started training. And even then it was, there wasn't a lot of things I learned. So I thought, okay, I'm going to learn, I'm going to train. And then, Dwayne got a contract shortly after, and there he was. And I heard about all these other guys. I was like, okay, so I'll train. And then, I should be there in, I don't know what I thought, something like under a year, right? And so year 1 goes by. I think I had a dark match in my first, I don't know, maybe 9 months or something like that. Nothing. I didn't hear anything back, right? It was terrible, I'm sure. And second year, same thing. And then I started doing some Japan stuff, and I started doing some stuff overseas, and getting to work there. And then I was so frustrated because I'd done all these, now we're like 4.5 years in, right? And I'd done all these different dark matches over the years. And I don't remember exactly how many I had, but I had a handful. And I tried different things. Like I went as Jimmy Snuka Jr. I didn't go as Jimmy Snuka Jr. I would try all these different things, and nothing was working. They didn't hire me, right? And so finally, here's this second piece of best advice Dwayne ever gave me, is he said, you got to use what you've got. You got to use what you've got. And he told me that the day I told him I'm going to get into the business, who should train me? And those were the words that he said to me, is like, listen, you got to use what you got. You got to have your dad train you. And so I had remembered that, right, is okay, I got to use what I got. Okay, what do I got? I'm not getting a job there. What do I got? Well, my dad's good friends with Vince McMahon, and right, and I'd never used that card before. And so I basically said to my dad, I said, listen, um, Dad, I can't get a job there. Can you introduce me to Vince and I'll do the rest? And he's like, well, you got to do this. You got to, and he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't do it.
Right.
And so, and I don't remember how many times I asked him. I don't remember. And finally, Raw was happening in somewhere on the East Coast. I think it was in New York. It might have even been in the Garden. I don't remember exactly, but it was close because we were in Jersey. Raw was that night, and me and my dad are driving the opposite way. And I said, Dad, and I pulled the car over. We're having an argument in the car at this time. A father-son respectful argument, right? And I'm because I have a lot of respect for my father, and especially in my culture, right? I wouldn't. There's a lot of respect, so I but I'm upset. I'm hot at this point, and I'm like, Dad, listen, I've tried. I've gone to Japan. I've done this. I've been on the Indies. I was like, Dad, I got a family. I was like, I cannot get a job at WWE. Just introduce me to Vince. I promise. You don't have to say a thing. I'll do the rest. Is like, I pull the car over, and now I almost cut a promo on my dad, right? So here's here's me, this spoiled kid, and I'm like cutting a promo on my dad. I don't remember exactly what I said, but something to the effect of, Dad, please, this is like the only chance I have of getting in there. I think, just introduce me. That's all I need. So he's like, okay. I'm like, okay. He's like, yeah, okay. So I flip this car around and I drive as fast as I can to Raw, right? And we pull up in there and we get in, and go to the back, and so we're walking around, and my dad, hey, is brother, is Vince around? And so we walk into catering, and lo and behold, nobody's in catering, and Vince comes walking right there in between, and I don't remember anybody else in there. The way I see it in my head is nobody's in the room, right? I don't know if that's true or not, but I saw Vince come walking, and
Oh.
he, yeah, right, right. It's like you can't write this stuff, right? So basically, Vince comes walking up, and sees my dad right away and gives him a big hug, and they talk a little bit, and then my dad goes, Vinny, brother, this is my son Jimmy, and son, this is Vinny. And I said, hello, Mr. McMahon. And then I just gave him my spiel, right? And I gave him my pitch and asked him for a job. And he said, well, I don't think you're ready. I don't think, whatever he said. He basically said, we can't hire you right now, right? And me having prepared, I'm like, okay. I figured he might say that because I kind of knew I wasn't ready. And then I said, well, how about OVW? How about if you send me to OVW? And he said, OVW, yeah, OVW. And it was kind of like that, right? But all I remember is him saying, yeah, OVW. I think he was saying some other stuff, but it kind of, I don't remember a lot after that, but him just saying yes. Okay, I could see that. And he's kind of looking off, like thinking about it, right? And then he said, okay, I'll have somebody get back to you.
Awesome.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So that now he comes to our area because OVW that's our bread and butter. So who called you?
After that happened, I leave. My dad goes to do his thing, and I'm walking around, and I'm walking through the hallway, and this is literally about 30 minutes. And the only reason I know is because I kind of look down at my watch right after this happens. It's about 30 minutes from the time we saw Vince, and Johnny Ace grabs me and he says, hey, hey kid, uh, listen, we want to send you down to OVW and give you a chance down there. So we're gonna have so and so, and that's all I heard, right? Is we're gonna send you down to OVW, and so I leave Johnny. I'm like, thank you very much, and I do all this stuff, and then I leave, and I found the nearest bathroom, shut the door, closed the stall, and I just screamed my head off. Right? I'm like, yeah, and I go nuts in this stall. Right? I don't know if there's and I just. I mean, I was probably crying. I won't admit it on this podcast, but I was I mean, I was obviously highly emotional because, my wife, kids, my dad, everything. And I'm frustrated for 4.5 years and now this happens. And so I'm like, okay, I got to, make the most of this thing.
Oh,
So
yeah.
that's who called me.
That's yeah, and that was a very good impersonation of Laurinaitis, by the way. Everybody has their own Laurinaitis impersonation. That was a top notch one, actually. So you go to OVW, and what was your thought process as soon as you pulled up to that building?
I was like, oh crap. And the reason I was like, oh crap is I signed the OVW contract. Everything. I'm ready to go, and I'm playing pickup basketball, and I tore the meniscus in my knee.
Oh,
I show up to WrestleMania on crutches with my dad. We're there at that, and if you look back at that Hall of Fame ceremony, right? I'm sitting right next to my dad, but there's a set of crutches right next to me.
oh man.
And so I go to WrestleMania, and then I'm supposed to report to OVW right after that. I show up to OVW on crutches.
That's rough.
And so here's my dream, right? I'm ready to do this thing, and I'm hurt. And so they're like, so I was there for, I don't know, how long was I there? Maybe 4 or 5 days. They're like, we can't do anything with you. You need to go home and get that taken care of, surgery, whatever. So they sent me back home. And I took care of it, rehab, everything else. And I show back up, many months later. And finally, but I'm not 100%. I'm trying to make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
But that was my initial when I first got there.
Man, that's rough.
Oh, yeah.
For sure. So,
How was your time in OVW? Training there and working with everybody, and because for the longest
it was
time,
a special.
yeah, we get that a lot.
we get that a lot.
For the longest time, because we're from Southern Indiana, so we always had OVW. We had your guys' live events. For the longest time, the world didn't get to see the talent down there and all the magic that you guys did, where we would see it, every Wednesday night.
I recall them being at a show in Seymour, I believe. Yeah, we're from Seymour, Indiana. That's where we're from.
Rip Rogers' hometown.
Rip Rogers' hometown.
Oh man, I remember those shows.
Yeah. So I recall y'all being there with was it Cherry? Was that her name?
I think so.
Cherry.
Yeah.
Yeah. You were there with Cherry, right? Wasn't that? Yeah, I remember. I love that 50s gimmick. It was so good. But back to that. So you get to OVW, and who did you initially start doing training classes with?
So I was in the contracted class, and so basically the Bashams had just left.
Mm-hmm.
Nick Dinsmore was around a little bit, but he was kind of like half on Eugene, right? He was kind of half on the road, half a little bit there. But that was kind of that time period of when those guys, when I was there. So I think that was 04 is the time period. And it was special because that Brock Lesnar, Shelton Benjamin, Randy Orton, all those guys had kind of left, and Eugene, he was like the last part of that, and then there was all us guys. right? That kind of kicked Johnny Jeter and Cage and all us guys coming through that class. And so it was fun, it was special. It was also hard for me because my family was still in Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
So we had moved to, right, we were in Vegas, and so I would fly back and forth every few months to see
Yes.
my family,
Yeah.
right? So it was a little bit tough, but great at the same time because of, those relationships and wrestling with those guys and doing those towns. I mean, we still have stories in my family, right, about the peach ice cream in Indiana, right? As you cross over the border and stopping out there for the peach ice cream. So good memories,
Oh
good
yeah.
memories.
Oh yeah.
That's awesome.
And any fond memories working in OVW, like working in wrestling? Anything special come to mind before you got the main roster call up?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of I there were a lot of great trainers that we ended up having there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And probably one of my fond, really, excuse me, one of my really fond memories was with Tommy Dreamer.
Mm-hmm.
We ended up doing this big show at the Six Flags there, right? And this was like the main event. It was a big blow off match, and I never forget. So it was supposed to be a hardcore match, right? Or we're going to introduce hardcore elements into the match, and there was, a bunch of us in it, and I'll never forget. We're trying to figure out who's going to grab the table, who's going to do this and that, and Tommy told me something that I'll never forget. He's like, no, you're the baby face. You gotta bring the tables out. You gotta introduce the stuff. And I was like, well, what do you mean? He goes, because the crowd's gonna pop, everybody's gonna go crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the value of having people that have been there and been in that situation and know, right?
Hmm.
That's why like training with my dad was so important. And then having somebody like Dreamer who knows hardcore, right? Like who knows it better than those guys.
Right.
And saying, you got to be the one to pull that out. And I think the reason that meant so much to me is because when I first started training with my father, he picks me up from the airport and we take this like almost 2 hour drive. And all we do is talk psychology.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. Is he wanted me to understand, okay, this is what you want to do is wrestle. Is like, great. Okay, this is why we do it. And right, and he's just teaching me the mindset of a wrestler. He's teaching me the psychology of why you do this, why that. And so I say there was many highlights in OVW, but Tommy Dreamer teaching me the psychology of pulling a table out from underneath the right as to there, you don't just go under there and go get it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is there's a reason you go and get that table or a chair or something. And he was right. I'll never forget it, right? Is I remember we come to that spot in the match and I go to grab the table out from it and the crowd freaking goes bananas, right?
Hmm.
And all the Six Flags, right? I can still see it in my eye, and they all go bananas, and I'm pulling this out, and then we're pulling trash cans out, and we're throwing junk in the ring. And Mike Mondo was, well, I think he was the other guy. It was me, Tommy Dreamer, Mike Mondo, and we're just throwing stuff in the ring, and the crowd's going bananas, right? But I think that's one of the reasons why I love that is I love the psychology. It's more important to me why we do stuff
Mm-hmm.
than it is that we just do stuff, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like for instance, like this podcast, for instance, it's not just a wrestling podcast, right? You guys are doing it, from what I understand, specifically for that developmental time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And to me, that's one reason why I agreed. I said, okay, yeah, I'll do this one, is because I hadn't heard of another one.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there is, I don't know, but I hadn't heard of another one that only talked about basically the developmental territories and given some love back to that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so why you guys are doing it means more to me than us doing it.
Thank you.
Yeah, we
We are
appreciate that. Yeah.
we are the first and only And like I was saying, we got to see all this special moments. So I don't think that, in my opinion, your career is not defined just by what you did on the main roster. It's that journey. It's all the work you did in developmental, before developmental.
A career starts from day one.
Yeah.
And that's what we want people to realize, that a wrestling career starts at day one, not from day one of being in the big company.
Yeah.
It starts from day one of their the day that you decide I want to be in the business is when your wrestling story starts.
Mm-hmm.
And we believe that, and that's what we want to share with people. And sharing stuff like the verbal gold you just shared, that your father told you and that Tommy Dreamer told you, that's there. You can't. That's not something you can buy.
Yeah.
That's just information that I would just sit down and listen to for hours.
Mm-hmm.
That's just how it is. I've been doing this for around 12 years, and I've sat and listened to Ricky Morton. I've sat and listened, to Boogie Woogie Man, Jimmy Valiant, and just listen to them tell you the mindset that you need to have, or all the different, just logic to wrestling. It's an amazing thing, and for you to bring that up and talk about how you got it from your father and you got it from Tommy Dreamer, it's a beautiful thing that if you don't talk about the developmental part of people's careers, you don't hear about that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the reasons why we're doing that. Also, because we have a huge love for OVW. Let's be honest, that's part of it. Growing up with OVW as our main staple wrestling that we watched around here, and on Saturday nights on Channel 7, that's part of it. But yeah, I do appreciate that you wanted to do the show, because that's what we do. That's for sure.
Like for me, it's like I love just being in the environment, the smell, just the atmosphere. Like it's hard to explain to somebody that's not a wrestling fan. It's not like I don't actually have to like just sit there. Like it's just the whole atmosphere that makes it magical, and I just love everything about it. It's all special.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Oh yeah. So let me share with you a piece of my developmental coming up. So when I first met Tommy Dreamer, right, this is part of that 4.5 years where I'm frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
So the ECW was still running that time, right? And so my dad takes me down to Philly, right? And we go to the ECW arena, and we go in the back, right? And he introduces me to Tommy Dreamer. And he says, hey, basically my boy just, I don't know, I'm a couple of months in, maybe 3 months in, training with my dad, and my dad introduces me to Dreamer and basically says, my boy, he's looking to work and wants to get into the business. He's been training for a few months now, and again, Dreamer being Dreamer, right? Totally honest, but understanding the psychology and kind of that feeling you're talking about, understanding the feeling of the fans. Mm-hmm. He says, again, something I'd never forget. And this is many years before we do the OVW show, right? Dreamer says, well, Jimmy, and I'm listening to Dreamer talk to my dad. I'm right there. And Dreamer says, well, listen, Jimmy, I'd love to have your boy come in. He goes, the problem is, he goes, if we put him out there and he's not ready, he goes, the ECW fans, they'll crap all over him, right? Mm-hmm. And he'll be done, right? If he's not ready. And so why don't we wait a little bit? Let's wait until he's ready and develops his own deal, mm-hmm. and then we can see. And again, right? He could have been like, bring him, Jimmy, as a favor to my dad. But Dreamer, again, understanding the psychology of mm-hmm. the way it works and stuff. Again, he helped me again. That was number one, actually. He helped me in that moment. So for us to do it on a show together, however many years later, it must have been, maybe 5-6 years from that time, mm-hmm. something like that, to be on a show together, it was, it was great. So The reason I was telling that story, I forgot. See, you got me distracted, man. You got me caught up in the emotion of the story. Quit doing that.
Oh, the emotion's the best part, brother.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, so that was one piece of this story. So what ended up happening is after Dreamer said all that, so I wanted to, because I'd never really gotten to it. I was younger when I used to go to the shows with my dad, right? And it'd been a while since I'd actually sat in the crowd and all that. So I'm in the middle ECW arena, and I'd only seen a little bit on a news, like somebody had done a news piece, right, on ECW and how crazy it was. And that's all I knew about ECW because I'm not a wrestling fan per se at this time, right? I'm just I've grown up in the business, grown up around it, but I don't necessarily watch wrestling as a fan. So I decide I'm going to go out in the arena. Nobody knows me from anybody, right? I'm just another dude, and I go in the middle, and I got to tell you that energy in ECW arena was crazy, right? I mean, it was and I'm barely even watching the match, and I don't even remember who was wrestling. It might have, yeah, I don't remember who was working, but I'm just looking around at how crazy the fans were going and just the energy of the building. Like if you've ever been in that arena and been to a show, right? A lot of people they won't get this to experience that, of course, because it's gone now. But it was incredible.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's almost with Tommy Dreamer, basically saying no, he's not ready. Bring him back when he's ready, because these fans will tear him apart. That's definitely something that a learning thing, because that's also the aspect of you got to know your demographic, and Tommy knew his demographic at that arena, and to protect you that way is, even though at the time it was probably like, oh, son of a bitch, I really want to be out there. But for Tommy to do that shows the respect that he has, not only for your father but for you, because he didn't want to see you get ate alive. And that, that's just another part of the logic and knowing as much as Tommy Dreamer knows. Go ahead.
Oh no. So you spent some time in OVW, and then how did the main roster call come about?
So we were, we were doing the Deuce and Domino gimmick, right? And we actually got sent to Deep South for a little bit, right? For, I don't know, it was like a weekend or two, something like that. I think it was 2 weeks. It might have been a 2 week period where we went down and worked some shows for them. And then we came back to OVW, and we ended up getting in this hot angle with Cody Rhodes and Sean Spears. What's his name now on the? He's on the. I forget his name.
I know
He was doing the 10 gimmick.
Yeah.
In when he got up to WWE, but is he with AEW now? I think.
Yeah, he's going by.
I don't
Sean
remember
Spears,
his name
I
now.
think he's going by Sean.
Yeah, he goes
Spears.
by Sean Spears now. He was.
Does he go by Sean Spears?
Yeah, he was Ty Dillinger, and then.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah, he was the perfect 10, Ty Dillinger. Now he's Sean Spears.
Okay, so Cody and Sean Spears were the babyface tag team, and we were working them in this fun, hot angle that we had in OVW. And I got to give a lot of credit to Al Snow for that, because Al let us work it, right? Like Domino he's such a wrestling fan and such a creative mind. Like he had all these ideas, right? Like the girl on roller skates was actually Domino's idea, right? The car, driving in the car, was Domino's idea. Like he was such a wrestling fan and so creative. Like I consider myself very creative, right? And Domino's in wrestling, though, he had this incredible creative mind. And so he had all these thoughts and these ideas that he would, that we would talk about. And so us getting called up to the main roster, we were working this hot angle with Cody and Sean. And thankfully, it got so hot that we ended up as the main event for what would be considered OVW's like WrestleMania, right? And it's at the end of the year, right? I think it was December. Is that right? Was their big blow off show, and so because our angle was so hot, they ended up putting us in the main event of that show, and so we end up dropping the titles to Cody and Sean, and then they had been bringing us up for stuff on the road, but not saying anything. Like we were doing dark matches, right? We were doing dark matches, and so nobody had said anything about debuting. We just knew we had to drop the titles and do all that. And now we're in, what year is that? 06, 07? Something
Sounds
like
about
that.
right.
I think it was
Right.
07. And basically, we're just supposed to come to TV and be ready, right? And then they basically told us that we were going to debut in Arkansas, in Little Rock, Arkansas. And I can't even remember the exact call or who said what or whatever. I remember, okay, just stay ready, kind of a thing. And then, okay, you guys are, it's time.
Yeah.
Little Rock,
Yeah.
Arkansas, here it is, right?
Yeah.
So
I could tell you as OVW fans, even if you probably didn't know exactly when your call up was coming, I guarantee you and me and him knew that you were getting called up, because if somebody loses a belt, it's typically how it always went in OVW. If somebody or a tag team lost their belt within 2 or 3, maybe 4 or 5 weeks, they were on WWE TV. That's just kind of how it works. Am I right? Yeah, I always thought that. I'm like, oh, they lost their belt. They must be getting called up. That's just always what I would think there towards, early on in OVW, I didn't think that. But around 06, 07, I started realizing, oh, wait, whenever they lose the belt, that usually means they're getting called up. So we didn't know exactly when you're going to get called, when you're going to be on TV, but we knew you were going to be pretty soon.
yeah, and that's just the way I remember it, right? I honestly cannot. I'd probably have to talk to Domino. He'd probably remember a lot better, like exactly what they said or when the call happened. But that's the way I remember it. So if he says something different, then my bad.
Any fond memories on your main roster run?
There is a lot.
Just like the relief of you finally made it, all this hard work, this journey.
Well, and since it's, I'll say this, since it's about the developmental territory, I'll say this, is when I was in OVW, right, so I was there for 3.5 years, right, which is like you wouldn't be able to make that today, right? That's that's an incredibly long time. And I actually didn't know till later that when I came back from off my crutches, so I had almost gotten fired. Like they told me later on that, because I was actually in a gimmick with Muhammad Hassan and Sean Davari, right? We were going to be a tag team. We were going to do the whole thing that they ended up doing on TV, right? And they ended up saying, okay, I guess Snuka's not ready, and let's bring these guys up and just make it a singles, and Davari will manage them, and it worked great for them, right? And I was happy for them, but then I was there for another 3.5 years, and the reason I bring that up is the frustration again. So 4.5 years just to get the OVW, and I know a lot of people have had a lot longer, and I'm not saying anything to that. I'm saying for me and my situation is, man, I was frustrated. Now I get there, and now we're literally watching all these other guys get called up, right? And I've been here, and I've been here, and I've been here. And I remember, like, it became a part where Johnny Jeter was the locker room leader, right? He'd been there a long time. He knew the deal. I mean, he was our leader. And then he gets called up with the Spirit Squad. And so now I'm like, okay, so I'm here again. And then I remember Crime Time, right? I was just on a show with them, and next thing they're on TV, and my kids, my boys who I would travel with, they travel on the road with me all the time, is they're watching TV, seeing Crime Time, and I remember them crying because, they're asking me, how come you're not on TV? And so just for us to debut, honestly, when we got to TV and it was like, okay, we're here, and let's go, it was such a relief, right? And then, and then you do and then you get a little bit of a raise, or that it's like, okay, the developmental money's over, and you get a little bit of a raise, and you can buy the supersized meal now, instead of just the fries. So it was a wonderful thought, and of course, seeing the world, um, I learned a lot of life lessons. Honestly, like that, being on the road, not just in OVW, but being on the road in WWE and just wrestling in general, it literally taught me so much about life, and it literally led into what I do now for a living, right? And all of the stuff that my dad was teaching me, I didn't realize, in all honesty, I didn't realize how much pro wrestling was going to be a life lesson for me. And so to say, like, there's specific moments, of course, we won the titles in Italy. It was like, okay, how many times did the title change hands in another country, right? Outside of the USA? How many times that happened? I I don't know. How many
Not
times did the
often.
tag titles change hands in outside the US?
Never.
I don't know,
That's
right?
awesome.
So
Yeah.
that was us, right? And I always remember my dad bringing up things like, we're trying to do it differently, right? Do what says never been done before. Do what's unique. Like, that was a common theme in my home. Is my dad was a very intense man, right? Like, when he was intense, but he was a lot of fun. There was a lot of love in my house. He wasn't the perfect father. He was gone all the time and stuff. But what he learned in professional wrestling, right? And what I learned around me is like, those lessons were invaluable, and I ended up using that to raise my kids, basically. Stuff like, you got to use what you got, right? And right, you got to be different, you got to be unique. um what's the finish, right? You got to concentrate on what the finish is. And so all those little wrestling things that I didn't think were that valuable at the time, now I use it every day, you know, working with athletes and coaches and people. And so when people ask me about WWE and what that time was like, I mean, it really, the whole thing as a collective whole was special, but there were a lot of choice moments, that I'll never forget. Like, wrestling in Australia, for instance. I loved wrestling in the Garden. I loved wrestling in Boston. Like, those things are crazy. But for me, like, if you were to ask me what was your favorite place to wrestle, I'd have to say Australia. And I think part of it has to do because of my heritage, right? My dad's from the islands. My mom's from the islands. My wife's from the islands. And there's a lot of Polynesians. There's a lot in California too, or a lot in, the East, or the places on the West Coast, right? But in Australia, it's like, right, it was thousands, and they were just making so much noise, and I'll never forget it. Like, I could just feel that energy, and I don't know if they knew I was Polynesian too, right? I'm playing a greaser gimmick, so I don't know, but I could feel it. I'm saying, for me personally, it was a moment. I don't know if it was for anybody else, Domino or anybody else, but for me it was. It was a special moment
Awesome.
for me.
What are you up to today?
So I do a few different things, but I do a lot of training and coaching with a lot of high level athletes, younger athletes, coaches, athletic programs. I have done some work with like people struggling with a lot of different issues. I've done businesses, that kind of thing. But in general, I like to work with athletes, coaches, athletic programs. So I do a lot of public speaking and training and coaching and stuff. And to be honest with you, It's literally a lot of these things I learned from my dad, from my parents, and pro wrestling, but in a way that can help athletes perform at a high level, help coaches coach better. Again, I've raised my kids on these principles of, some of that I've mentioned already, right? Is, like, for instance, here's a for instance, is somebody will say, okay, like, how are we gonna write this paper, or how are we gonna do this talk? And I'll say, well, how do you want it to end? Right? What's the finish? Just like I learned in professional wrestling, right? Is people would come in all the time, right? And they'd say to my dad, and I'd hear him, or I'd hear him say to The Rock, right? Like, oh, brother, how are we going to start this thing? How are we going to do this match? And how are we going to start it off? And I hear my dad, brother, slow down, right? Let's talk about the finish, brother. We got to talk about the finish. We got to know where we're going before we can try to get there, brother. My dad would talk in that way, and the great ones, that is how they would figure things out. Is you got to know where you want to be first before you figure out the start's easy. And so that's a lot of what I do now. So I'm in the middle of writing a book on that, on those types of principles. And so hopefully I can get it done by the end of the year, and maybe, have it out in the public in 2023.
Awesome.
And so just trying to do some of that stuff, man, and
Yeah,
help
let
my
us know.
kids
We'll
do
promote
their
it
own
for sure.
thing.
Yeah, we'll help promote the book for sure. Let us know. That'd be awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I want to thank you for everything that you've done for wrestling.
Yes.
Being from Southern Indiana, we got to see a lot of your career. More than just the main roster run. And what you did mattered, and I personally thank you for everything that you've done.
Absolutely, thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. Well, I got a question for you guys. Is there a favorite Deuce and Domino moment, or a moment from OVW that stood out to you? Like, what was something that might have stood out to you guys? I'm curious to know.
What's yours?
There's, like I said, I have my memory muddles things together, but I do remember the feud that you talked about with Cody Rhodes and Shawn Spears, and I remember it. I remember absolutely despising you guys, because I was a huge Cody mark. Let's be honest, I was a huge mark for Cody.
So were my kids. My kids they were, yeah. Cody was over with my kids, so you know what I mean?
Right,
I get it.
And the reason being is I met Cody in the Seymour High School gym when he was still doing the referee thing. Yeah, so, and I sat over and talked to him. I didn't know who he was. I just knew he was a referee. And I was younger, of course. And I was talking to him about wrestling and all this. And then I do believe it was this guy right here that was like, oh, by the way, that's Dusty Rhodes' son. I was like, what? So because of that, I was a huge, and I do remember, it's been so long, but I do remember them winning, and I remember being so happy. But as much as I disliked your character, I now realize that was you doing your job. Years later, and that you did your job really well.
Sometimes that Louisville, Kentucky crowd could go nuts. I always remember the Davis Arena just being loud and packed to the brim, and just they're very vocal. So you guys as heels, I loved it. It's hard to recapture that magic like that was down there. You know what I mean? Because everybody was so invested, and they loved, invested in all these characters, invested in all these personalities. Because that was their part of their weekly life. Every week they knew they were going to see these people, and they knew that they were going to be able to boo, to cheer, to meet these people weekly. So it was like a family environment, right. Week in, week out. So that to me was always very, very special. Because I knew if I didn't get to talk crap to you this week, I got you next week.
Yes, that was the fun of it, right? Mm-hmm. The interaction with the crowd, and yeah, it was. I mean, I know you guys have said that, a lot of people have said that it was a special time, but for me, there's not another way to really describe that or explain that. It was a special time. Not only in my life, but in the lives of, everybody that was connected with that. And it sounds like, from a fan's perspective as well for you guys and hopefully many others, it was as well. So yeah, special moments, a lot of good memories that helped shape my life and the lives of my family, lives of my kids, because they got to spend a little bit of time down there. I ended up moving them down afterwards. And we lived there for about a year before we got called up. Mm-hmm. So once I got called up, the family was there, and we got to close up that OVW chapter, mm-hmm. man. But appreciate you guys letting me come on and spend some time and talk a little love from the past, man, and bring up all those old emotions.
Oh yeah, for sure. You made an impact in our lives, and I greatly appreciate it.
Hey, you guys take care, man. Good luck with what you guys are doing, man. Much appreciate you guys putting this together and
thank you.
Providing a little platform for maybe people to take a look in the past and look behind the curtain a little bit of what was going on. So thanks so much, you guys, for taking the time to put me on, and good luck with everything. All the best, guys.
Thank you. Appreciate
Have a great one. Thank you. Hey everybody, it's Morty.
It's Brian.
And thank you for watching today's episode of Developmentally Speaking.
If you could, please click that subscribe button.
And don't forget to punch that bell icon so you can get notified whenever we go live or drop a new video every Monday. Well, thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you on the next
Developmentally Speaking.